Kash Patel stood before Congress and told the world there was no credible information that Epstein trafficked girls to other people. He said it with confidence. He said it without blinking. And then Ted Lieu walked in with a single sheet of paper, one page, and in 60 seconds, the entire story Patel had been telling America collapsed in real time, because that paper had a signature on it, Patel's signature, on the order that shut the investigation down. Before we get to the document, you need to understand what Kash Patel promised, not what Democrats claimed he promised, what he said himself in his own words on camera before he had the power to do anything about it. In 2023, right-wing podcaster Benny Johnson asked Patel why the Epstein list had never been released. Patel's answer was 3 words: because of who's on that list. That clip was played back to him in the hearing room. Patel sat there and watched his own face say it. The man who once called himself a crusader for Epstein transparency was now the man being asked to explain why nothing had been released and why, under his watch, the investigation had been quietly closed. Jamie Raskin put it directly in his opening statement. In a few short months, how did you go from being a crusader for accountability and public transparency for the Epstein files to being part of the conspiracy and cover-up? The answer is simple. You said it yourself: because of who's on that list. The room went silent because everyone in that chamber understood what Raskin was doing. He wasn't making an accusation. He was playing Patel's own words back at him and asking him to explain the distance between who he was in 2023 and who he had become by 2026. Patel's defense was the same in every exchange: court orders, legal constraints, structured evaluation processes. He repeated it like a prayer. When pressed on why he hadn't released federal interview reports from people involved in the Epstein investigation, Patel said, "We are releasing as much as legally allowed." Dan Goldman, a former federal prosecutor, responded immediately, "Sir, do you know how court orders work?" House Goldman wasn't being theatrical. He was pointing to something specific, that Patel kept citing court seals and legal restrictions that investigators and legal analysts who reviewed the docket said did not exist. Documents that watchdog groups had formally requested. Documents that a federal judge had already said the government itself was the logical party to disclose. The legal excuse wasn't holding up under examination. Then Ted Lieu walked in with the document. The confrontation centered on FBI case closure authorization form 1099-C for investigation number EF 2023-147. Lieu held it up to the cameras. The document showed a major 3-year investigation, 400 subpoenaed financial records, 14 witnesses, 7 active agents closed without a final report, without a prosecutorial referral, without a resource reallocation memo. Just a signature, Kash Patel's signature. Northwave News Lieu, who spent years as a federal prosecutor before entering Congress, knew exactly what that absence meant. Under standard FBI protocol, when an investigation of that scale closes, it generates paperwork, it generates a record, it generates a reason. Lieu stated, "In my experience, when an investigation has 400 financial records, 14 witnesses, 7 agents, and 3 years of active work, it doesn't get closed because the evidence ran out." Northwave News Patel's response was a 53-word procedural explanation citing structured evaluation processes and investigative viability. Lieu called it wallpaper. The hearing room understood why. What made this moment structurally different from the usual congressional sparring was the paper itself. Patel could not deny the signature. He could not claim the document was fabricated. It was entered into the congressional record. What he could do and what he did was refuse to explain it. Patel's defense that nobody told me to close any investigation was met with forensic silence. Northwave News. Because the form didn't require anyone to tell him. He signed it. His name was on the closure. The investigation he had promised to pursue, the one he had told Benny Johnson's audience was being hidden because of who was on the list, that investigation now had his name on the order that ended it. Eric Swalwell pressed further, revealing that Patel had not even reviewed all of the Epstein files himself. Swalwell put it plainly, "You're the director of the FBI. This is the largest sex trafficking case the FBI has ever been a part of. The buck stops at the top. And your testimony today is that you have not reviewed all the files." No answer came. Then Lieu asked the question that stopped the room entirely. He asked Patel directly whether Donald Trump's name appears on Epstein's client list. Patel flatly refused to answer. Lieu turned to the camera and said, "America, that's a huge red flag. The FBI director could not answer whether Donald Trump was on Epstein's client list." And while Patel was refusing to answer in that hearing room, the DOJ was quietly moving in a different direction entirely. On March 5th and 6th, 2026, NPR reported that the Justice Department had withheld and removed Epstein files specifically related to Trump from the public database. The files had been marked duplicative. And then, after the NPR investigation went public, more than 1,000 new pages was suddenly released. Among them were summaries of 4 FBI interviews with a woman who alleged that Epstein introduced her to Trump when she was between 13 and 15 years old, and that Trump sexually assaulted her. Miami Herald reporter Julie K. Brown, who has broken more of the Epstein story than any other journalist alive, reported that DOJ officials who spoke directly with this woman found her credible and noted they would not have interviewed her 4 times if they didn't. PBS White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responded that Trump had been totally exonerated by the release of the Epstein files. NPR, but independent journalist Roger Sollenberger, who has tracked every document release, noted that at least 37 pages remain missing even after the new batch. And then there is the geopolitical dimension that Washington is not discussing openly. Thomas Massie, Republican, not Democrat, said it on the record. Bombing a country on the other side of the globe won't make the Epstein files go away. Al Jazeera. Massie had been one of the architects of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. He understood the timeline. The Iran war began 5 days after the DOJ's most damaging Epstein release. Analyst Shael Ben Ephraim, a former Israeli diplomat, told Al Jazeera that Trump really needs a distraction from his domestic issues in the form of a war. 2 separate crises, one very convenient sequence. That sequence is not lost on Europe's most watched political figure right now. Giorgia Meloni has spent the past several weeks threading the most difficult diplomatic needle of her career. Close enough to Trump to maintain the transatlantic relationship, far enough to preserve her constitutional position at home. On the Epstein matter specifically, her office has maintained public silence. But silence in Rome is never empty. Italy has watched the Epstein files consume Washington for months. The newly released DOJ documents revealed that Steve Bannon, the man who helped build Meloni's ideological movement across Europe, had been in direct contact with Epstein, messaging him about efforts to take down Pope Francis and coordinate European populist networks. That revelation landed in Rome like a grenade. Meloni's political identity was built in part through her association with Bannon's network. The Epstein files now have her mentor's name inside them. She has said nothing. Her government has said nothing. And every day she says nothing, the question gets louder in Italian political circles. Trump, for his part, is not making her silence easier to maintain. Having already called Meloni's position on his Iran war helpful, while she publicly called the conflict's consequences unpredictable and a risk of escalation, the relationship now carries the weight of 2 separate crises simultaneously: the war that she won't endorse and the files that implicate her network. The Italian parliament is watching. The Italian press is watching. And Meloni, who built her entire political brand on transparency, accountability, and standing up to corrupt elites, now finds herself being asked quietly, but persistently, why the most powerful ally she has is the man whose name appears more times in the Epstein files than God's name appears in the Bible. So here is the question that the signature on Form 1099-C forces onto the table. If Kash Patel signed the order that closed a 3-year investigation into the largest sex trafficking case in FBI history, an investigation with 400 financial records, 14 witnesses, and 7 active agents, and he cannot tell Congress why, cannot say whether Trump's name is on the client list, and cannot explain why the files that directly implicate the sitting president were quietly removed from the public database before being forced back out, then who exactly gave him the instruction to close it, and what were they afraid those 400 financial records were going to find?